Good afternoon, everyone. In 2018, I read an article in The Atlantic where a journalist talked about how his wife and he, both English teachers, used Robert Frost's famous poem, Mending Wall, to illustrate to their students the reader response methodology. In the context of a poem, of course. The couple had exactly opposite interpretations to this poem, and they decided that they would team teach this poem, arguing for their respective interpretations and also inviting their students to join in. Later, they would explain why their respective lives had inclined them to read the poem the way they did. The beauty of poetry is really that, its seemingly infinite capacity for interpretation. It is really what makes literature also so pleasurable, so personal, so exciting, and so invigorating. One song, many stories, draws inspiration from that idea, except in this case, those reading the same poem are also, in a sense, poets of their own. As performing artists who have the innate capacity for response, articulation, expression through the medium of the arts, music and dance in this case, One Song, Many Stories is a poetic experiment that celebrates the diversity of voices in the reading of a poem. We've curated this session in a way that only KarthikHebbar, the musician, and I know how each of the three dancers have interpreted the poem, and by virtue of witnessing three different responses to the same poem, we will also not only be privy to artistic imagination that is really a culmination of our life experiences, but also celebrate the magic of poetry and its ability to be both a personal and a shared experience, sometimes at the same time. Thank you, Karthik, Anuradha, Praveen, and Shweta for being a part of this poetic experiment, One Song, Many Stories. I now request KarthikHebbar to introduce the poem.
I take pleasure in introducing the poem for today. It's a Kannada poem by Dr. J. Shivarudrappa. His poetry is known for his contemporary thought, especially his poetry on love. They're very beautiful and are very well known in Karnataka. His use of language, his use of metaphors, and his use of rhythm is mind-boggling. So the poem today is called Nenapideye. So instead of explaining or talking about the poem, I have made a very, very, very crude translation of the poem. So I'll just read it out, and I think it will be evident to all of you. Just the two of us standing by the riverbed, just the two of us standing by the riverbed, building castles in sand, playing joyfully. Do you remember? Do you remember that day? When the monsoon showers poured, we stood there drenched, watching our castles dissolve and vanish away. Do you remember that day? This sand, this is mine. That portion of sand is yours. We fought fiercely and stopped talking. That too was a game. Do you remember that day? Next day, together we built those castles again and again, clapping our hands in glee, breaking into songs and dance. Don't you remember that day? That very same river silently flows even today. That river flows even today. Come, friend, let's play again. Let's rebuild that beautiful garden of childhood. Come, let's build that garden again. This is the poem. Yeah, I first invite Anuradha to come and interpret the poem through a movement. ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ.
ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ. ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ. ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂತಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ. ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ? ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ? ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು. ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು ನಿಂತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ. ನಿಂತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ? ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ? ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಲ್ದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಲ್ದು. ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಲ್ದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಲ್ದು. ಹೊಡೆದಾಡಿ ಜತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ. ಹೊಡೆದಾಡಿ ಜತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ? ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ? ಮರುದಿವಸ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ. ಮರುದಿವಸ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಕೈಯ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ತಟ್ಟಿ ಹಾಡಿ ಕುಣಿದ ದಿವಸ. ಕೈಯ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ತಟ್ಟಿ ಹಾಡಿ ಕುಣಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ? ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ? ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯೇ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ. 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 ಬಾ ಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ. ಬಾ ಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ. ಬಾಲ್ಯದೋದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ. 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 anum danum danum dum dadaganum tum danum danum tum tatanum tatanum ta tanum tarum tatanum danum dana dana danum dana dana danum dana dana danum 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 taganum danum danum tatanum danum danum tum tatanum tatanum ta tanum ta num ta ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಮಾಡಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಮಾಡಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿಸ ಮರಿಸ ನಿಸ ನಿಸರಿಸ ಮಬನಿ ಬಮನಿ ಪ ಮಬನಿ ಬ ನಿಸರಿಸ ಮರಿಸ ನಿಸರಿಸ ಸರಿ ನಿಸ ಪನಿ ಮ ಪರಿ ಮ ಪ ಮರಿಸ ನಿಸ ರೇ 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 ಮ ಪಪ್ಪ ಬಾಬ ಮಮ ಪಪ್ಪ ಬಾಬ ಮಮ ಪಪ ನಿ ನಿ ಪ ಮ ಪನಿ ಪ ಮನಿ ಪ ಮ ಪನಿ ಪ ಮನಿ ಪ ಮ ರೇ 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 ಮ ಪನಿ ನಿ 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 ಪ ಪ ಪ ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು ನಿಲ್ತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ ನಿಲ್ತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಂದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಂದು ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಂದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಂದು ಹೊಡೆದಾಡಿ ಜತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ 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 ಮರುದಿವಸ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಮರುದಿವಸ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಕೈಯ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ತಟ್ಟಿ ಹಾಡಿ ಕುಣಿದ ದಿವಸ ಕೈಯ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ತಟ್ಟಿ ಹಾಡಿ ಕುಣಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯೇ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯೇ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಬಾಗೆಡತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾಗೆಡತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ Thank you, Shweta. ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ಒಂದು ಹೊಳೆಯ ದಡದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಂದು ಮರಳು ಮನೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟಿ ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು ನಿಂತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಮುಂಗಾರು ಮಳೆ ಹೊಯ್ದು ನಾವಿಬ್ಬರೂ ತೊಯ್ದು ನಿಂತಾಗ ಮರಳ ಮನೆ ಕೊಚ್ಚಿ ಹೋದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಈ ಮರಳು ನನಗೆಂದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಂದು ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಂದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಂದು ಹೊಡೆದಾಡಿ ಜತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಈ ಮರಳು ನಿನಗೆಂದು ಆ ಮರಳು ತನಗೆಂದು 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 ಹೊಡೆದಾಡಿ ಜತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಟವಾಡಿದ ದಿವಸ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ನಿನಗೆ ನೆನಪಿದೆಯೇ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯೇ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯೇ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಬಾಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆ ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದು ಹರಿದ ಹೊಳೆಯು ಇಂದಿಗೂ ಹರಿಯುತ್ತಿದೆ ಬಾಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಗೆಳತಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಟವಾಡೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾಲ್ಯದುದ್ಯಾನವನು ಮರಳಿ ಕಟ್ಟೋಣ ಬಾ ಗೆಳತಿ ಬಾ ಬಾ
to actually speak after, after watching this multitude of ideas, boundaries, innocence, nostalgia, memories, hope, divisiveness, so many ideas. Firstly, kudos to the poet for writing something that has the possibility of so many interpretations. Kudos to our poet KarthikHebbar, who not only infused his voice into the poem, but also infused the spirit of each artist's imagination into the way he sang for each of you. Karthik, that was just amazing, you know. And of course, a big round of applause for the dancers who interpreted these poems so very beautifully. So without much ado, I know that we have about 25 minutes. I'm going to firstly really start off by asking Karthik. Karthik, you determined, you sort of chose the poem. What really determined that choice?
As soon as you asked, Akhila, so I had a lot of poems in mind. I didn't want to choose anything that is traditionally already in vogue in the classical dance. I wanted to pick something different. And we cannot but agree that today, all over the world, we are much more divided as a society than we ever were. So it is important to use verses, literature, and text that can keep inspiring us to go back to the time when we were not divided. So this is one poem that came to my mind because when we had a WhatsApp group of our school friends, so suddenly there was a fight and all of them left the group for a very silly reason. And we know that
WhatsApp groups, right?
Yeah, and we know that we are not that hateful, but it is the environment that is making it all hateful. So during that time I had read this poem and had become very emotional, and I kept thinking it's actually so simple.
like Tagore says, it's so simple. But it's difficult the simplicity is also difficult. So I thought this poem would be very apt.
I mean, absolutely, and the choice of a Kannada poem in Bengaluru, that was fantastic. Karthik, how would you have interpreted this poem?
I have interpreted it in different ways.
You know, we saw 3 different interpretations, but what is your interpretation?
Yeah, so I said, like, I'd used this in theatre some time back, and during that time, I'd interpreted this song as a voice of Kabir, who's standing in the border and talking about unheardness. So very similar to what Shweta thought, I think, in her performance. Right. But if I have to interpret it now, there were different ways I would think of this poem as India singing this song for Pakistan, or probably West Bengal singing it for Bangladesh. Also, I think Mother Earth singing this poem to humans to go back to the time when we are not destroying her like this, mindlessly. Maybe that is also a way of interpreting. And in a very visible, possible way, I would have think of it as Krishna coming back from Kurukshetra war and seeing his whole family being cursed and standing beside that river Yamuna and finding something from a Gopika's tree and remembering that, our life used to be much simple. So let us go back to that time. So let me shed my discus and conch and let me pick up the flute again. Let us go back to just dancing and singing and being in love.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Anuradha, your interpretation of this poem was really, it imagines the river as the river of humanity. Could you just share how you responded to it and whether soon after, this has been a week-long, 10-day process that we've all been talking. So when you first heard it, was this your first response or did you think about it and then did you sort of, decide to interpret it this way?
When I first read it, I guess the first response, the first words that came into mind was obviously the ideas of friendship, relationship, bonding, communication. And I had also shared with Karthik that I had connected with a friend of mine with whom I shared a friendship of 25 years and we broke for almost 1.5 years. And it was so beautiful to get back to that. Then when I was rereading this poem and sharing it at home with my husband, we suddenly thought of this beautiful poem by Gulzar, Lakirein hain to rehne do, kheenchti hongi, kisi ne root kar gusse mein. And it is in the context of partition. But I think I just wanted to use that metaphor of tangible and intangible boundaries, borders that we keep drawing and othering in whatever respect. So I just wanted to keep that idea and move on with it.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Praveen, what about your response? Yours is a man's perspective of him and his partner looking back at life that once was. And there was a certain innocence and beauty about it. Could you talk about how you decided to interpret it this way?
Like what Karthik was saying, and in times like today when the bonding is been so important between two people, and I always believed that, every 5 years, our kind of relationship or bonding with any particular person keeps changing. Yeah, it's not the same over the years. And for you, a childhood friend whom you was there with you and you would have fought with them. And over the years, there have been many friendships. I've seen childhood friends who become partners now. I have many friends of mine. We were all part of a group. We were all friends and suddenly over the years, suddenly I saw them, both of them are now partners as such. Right. So that kind of gave me an inspiration to see how the journey of a person can also be, the friendship can grow. And like I said, for me, it was more like of harmony between two people to see how one can gel together. And sometimes these places, those memories can always bring you back, those moments back. Like what just now Anuradha said, that she had a friend and they broke up for 1.5 years. I'm sure something would have got triggered back for you to get back. So sometimes these places, when you see, you suddenly remember, this place, I was there with this person. So maybe I should connect it back. So sometimes for me, these places kind of give you a connection to bond you back. So I think that place of riverbank or something would always kind of haunts you back to those relationships. Yeah.
Like nostalgia and memories. Yeah, that's great. Shweta, your interpretation really celebrates innocence and also the magic of hope. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you arrived at this?
Sure. So one of the key things for me is the language in which the poem I received it, and It's the first, because I don't come from a home that speaks a South Indian language. The first thing that hits me is the words. And I know Karthik was very, he worked so hard to give us the word-to-word meaning and the possible meanings and what it means in Kannada, what the words mean in Kannada. But there is something very culturally rooted in every language, and therefore its interpretation requires a cultural understanding that goes beyond just the word and its meaning. Yeah. So, to be very honest, the language is very new to me. I'm just still getting to learn Tamil, so Kannada is definitely a new sound. But despite that, I think there were a few, for me the poem was very visual, because there were a few visuals in it that immediately spoke to me. The first one, I think that was the last one because it stayed forever, was E Maralu, like this sand is mine and that sand is yours. Which, like Akka, it reminded me of another one of Gulzar's poems, which is Zero Line. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you have read it, because there's a very beautiful thing he says is when I stand at line 0, which is at the border, I'm standing in India, but my shadow is across the line, and the sun is behind me. So where am I? Am I here or am I there? And it was a very strong image that stayed in me, because I have a history of partition in the family, and they speak of the land that is no more considered India as a land where they flourished. So they are unable to see it as a space that is not theirs, and somehow that carries bad memories, irrespective of what happened and what went through. So for me, that image was very strong, because it was like, it was very silly of, it is, I believe, very silly of human beings to draw lines in the sand and call this land mine and that land yours. And I think that was the image that stayed with me throughout, and because of that image, the rest of the interpretation came through. My first instinct with poem is always the literal meaning as the poet imagines it in friendship. But because that image was so strong, that was one of the images. The other one was of, because again, there's so much sand, I was thinking of a poem from Sangam, which was Red Earth and Pouring Rain. And it's about love. And it's about how love happens when the dry red earth meets the pouring rain, and they cannot be separated anymore, like milk, like sweet milk, or like wet mud. And I think it's that idea of where it's humanly impossible to separate elements, so I don't know why we waste so much time separating and dividing so many things.
It's really, really beautiful. Thank you so much. Karthik, as a musician, you sing for dance and dancers. It's obviously crucial that you are aligned with the imagination of the dancer who's performing. I'm just curious to ask you, have there been occasions when, you do not align with their interpretation? And has it been hard for you to actually detach yourself from that? And how do you actually, make it soulful despite that?
Multiple times. So there have been...
Thank you for that honest answer.
Many times when I could not just connect to what they're saying, and it didn't matter. But one thing about singing for dance is that when I came to singing for dance, I came with a lot of ego. That I'm a classical singer and I can do whatever I want here. And this is very, like secondary. But then I learned that this has its own world, its own requirements. And more than anything, it's a standard class in meditation. It lets me kill my ego, let me not be myself, and put the artist into myself and perform with them. And that's a beautiful experience. So I might not agree with their interpretation, but I will have the empathy to understand that this means something to them. And to work with that empathy really empowers me. And it gives me a different way of looking at things. And sometimes, if I can so say, with the humor, to alert me at not doing things in a certain way. So I'm already there. So the mistake has happened, so I need not do it. Right. So that way I'm very empowered, I think.
Right, that's great. Karthik, this time too, we all will agree that you infused your own, their interpretation of the song in the way you delivered the piece. Could you just talk a little bit about, how you sang for Anuradha was different from your interpretation for Praveen?
See, the beauty of today's performance is that we never rehearsed. I didn't see what they're doing.
Yeah,
I just saw it now.
Yeah.
We just discussed it, and I've just seen it now, and I was singing while seeing them. And I can get different energy from different people. Shweta, of course, first time I'm performing with her. With Praveen and Anuradha, I've already performed, and I know their energies. So for me, it's very beautiful because Anuradha brings a lot of her theatre training and her love for abstract expression, and
we could see that.
Yeah, and more than the literal abhinaya, there is a lot of satvika and what she's trying to bring from her inner self, and that radiates. Her honesty radiates through that performance, so I can relate to it in a very beautiful way. With Praveen, he has, I think, a very keen observation of minute human emotions, and the way he knows to present it with so much sincerity and beauty that it's like listening to a story from a friend. And so I enjoy singing for that too. And with Shweta, obviously I recently read Geetanjali Shree's Ret Samadhi, and I'm not able to come out of that book and the story of the partition that's there. So when she told me about she being pregnant and that she's receiving recipes from her mom's side, and all the recipes come from Pakistan, that history of that. So it touched me in beautiful, and I was thinking about it for a lot of time. And today when she was performing, I could sense that her journey was on a different tangent. Yeah. So it's beautiful, I think, for me to engage with these different energies and sing according to that.
That's fantastic. And I think when I sort of
add one thing,
please,
just before I forget. So with only for Shweta, if you must notice, I changed the ragas because she was doing as two children and friends or lovers or whatever, and then about states and all that. So I went from Desh, which is the idea of country, to the raga Sindhu, Bhairavi, from where India comes and the Sindh Pradesh also comes. So I thought that was a beautiful raga.
That was really a...
Thank you.
When I sort of curated this idea, I was also keen to see how the audience, therefore, also responds differently to each of the artist's interpretation of this, but we will come to that in just a few minutes. I wanted to ask Anuradha a question really about, as dancers and choreographers, constantly reading and interpreting poetry. What is your process, Anuradha? How do you start?
To be very honest, I think it's reading and rereading and rereading till it talks to you. Apart from the traditional compositions which come with their certain boundaries where you need to understand the context and things, somewhere I feel contemporary poems free us also from it.
Was this that sort of a feeling?
Yes, of course. And I wish we could do the same with the traditional poems that we take in. But because of the oral history of learning it and interpreting it in a certain way and saying that this is the naika and this is the dominant emotion, I'm not saying it's restrictive, but yes, it has a certain way of doing, and this has a certain. So I think in terms of saying research, I would just say it's rereading it till it speaks to you. Right, absolutely. Thank you for that. Praveen, as a dancer, I really want to understand how crucial how crucial is it for you to really own the poetry that you perform? Over the years of performing poetry over and over again, and some pieces over time, with age, there is a sense of comfort and familiarity that you find in that poetry. Does the response and expression of it change and constantly evolve over the years?
Yeah, definitely, because like I said, as humans, we all change every 5 years. So for us, I'm sure Shweta and Anuradha will also agree, or maybe Karthik also as a singer, any composition over the years, the same composition when you revisit, the way you look into the same composition, you look at it in a very different perspective, totally. So for me, I'm just saying today, if we looked at poetry at this, if you give us another chance, we will start looking at it in a different way. Right. We're not going to repeat the same thing, because you get each time when you're working on something, you're getting ideas, you build on something, then you kind of subtract something. Yeah. So there's a constant, it's kind of reinventing yourself, right, for you as an artist, because one has to be that. Because if you look at the poetry, like what Shweta was saying, that she read something which spoke about the border, and Karthik also mentioned about something. Right. If you really look into that, maybe even this poetry which was written by G.S. Shivarudrappa has got a kind of little bit of tone of those things also in that. So there's always one common link somewhere between every poetry. Yeah. But everybody has got their own different voices to express it. Right. And regarding owning the composition, yes, definitely. I have to be that character. If you're not, like Karthik was saying, if I don't step into their zone, then it's difficult to express. So we have to step into that. I think that's an advantage of being a dancer. You can become Rama, you can become Krishna, you can become anybody. Anybody. So that's the beauty of the dancer, right? So.
No, absolutely. Shweta, earlier this morning, and we had lunch with Meeta Vasisht as well, she talked about Lal Ded's poetry, and she spoke about Vak. And she said about learning to respond to those words in the language that they were originally written in. As a dancer, you inhabit a poem and also make it your own. So in a sense, then you become the poet. Do you ever feel the need to stay true to that interpretation as envisaged by that poet? Or do you believe that poetry is like a river, constantly evolving? For example, now this poem, you saw two different interpretations of it. If you were to perform this piece again that you did, would it have influences and inspirations and ideas from what you just saw as well? And therefore, the poem is really a constant work in progress?
I think there are two parts to the question. So one is about the intent of the poet. In the way that I am learning Abhinaya, the intent of the poet is sacrosanct, in the sense that he is the first creator of the idea. When it is layered with dance, it is another poem, but starting from that inspiration. So the intent of the poet, I think, there's no rule. There's nothing that says that you cannot change, but I think there's something very deep in that idea itself. And I think, like Anna said, right, the more you read it over time, based on everything else that has happened in your life, whatever else you have read and experienced, the meaning of that first primary instinct will change, which is why you have three interpretations. Otherwise you won't, because we all have studied the same, the same form of dance. So the reason there are different interpretations is because each of us has understood the intent and tried to stay honest to that intent in our own way. And therefore there will always be multiple interpretations. So also I feel whatever you do, whether you stay true or you go really far away, you are still writing a new poem through the medium of dance. So it's always moving poetry. And what I really enjoy, which is an added layer, is each time you perform it to a different audience, the energy will change, the interpretation as well. So there is a two-person interface that takes place when you're performing versus, I guess, when you're reading, because the poet is not around to see how the reader is reading their poem. So I feel like dance gives that added perspective to a poem. I think I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. Thanks. Well, we have 10 minutes, actually 8 minutes, if 5 minutes? 10 minutes. So if you'd like to ask any questions, we could do that, and I could also intersperse it with some questions of my own, because I want to give some time for questions from the audience. Please go ahead. Should I bring you a mic? Yeah, okay.
It's more than a question. It's a thank you, a big thank you to all the performers. Because this is the favorite song of my parents. Oh. And G.S. Shivarudrappa, I've grown up hearing them. My mother would sing it in a very different tone, and when each of you interpreted it. So they used to sing it when I was young, and then, they sang it at different stages of my life. So the same way, right? So they were free birds earlier, before the things of the family, the burden, and we grew up, all that started. So then again, when you interpret it, the river is still flowing. So it's like, saying, come, let's go back to those days. So. Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Very beautiful.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for sharing. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. My
Yes,
question
please.
is for Anuradha, ma'am. So you've been doing dance since more than 20 years, I guess. And as you said that there are different interpretations of dance. So throughout your journey, what's the thing that you would want to tell the audience that gives a message from dance to the people who have not studied this dance, but they take something from it?
Okay, that's a really a question for a panel discussion in itself, but yeah.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, we couldn't hear you
Basically,
properly.
I think she's asking
What do we take?
what are the takeaways, for those
like,
who
what are the
perhaps not
takeaways?
studied classical dance formally?
Basically, I am a classical dancer since the last 14 years. But there are people here who might not have studied it.
be familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, like
What can they take away from
if you really see, if G.S. Shivrudrapa is one poet, we are also poets with a different medium. That's all. It's the same poetry, we're trying to add some colors to it, like what Shweta said, you're adding a different layer to it. So, every interpretation, it's like, just to give an example, okay, there is upma making. There are so many ways of upma, right? So each one of us are giving an idea how to make an upma. So you decide which upma will suit you, and maybe that can be a takeaway.
Thank you so much.
Also, if I can add one line to that, I think as a generation, we are too stressed about understanding everything.
I was just going to
we
say
need
that.
not
yeah.
understand. Sometimes we can just watch and take in the subtext, let them speak to you, and that will do. Everybody need not understand everything. You can derive your own meaning from
You can
it.
just
Thank you
taste
so
the
much.
upma enough.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, I don't. A very good afternoon to the panel. I would like to first thank Atagalata for organizing this Bangalore Poetry Festival. Guys, put a big hand for him. Okay. Now, coming to the technical point, Karthik, you were singing and giving another expression. Have you gone away from the classical definition of that raga? Have you taken the liberty to change or fuse just to get the interpretation merged with the poetry, or have you stuck on to the original classic composition of the raga?
First of all, this is not a classical composition, so it does not come from a certain school of thought. And I'm still trying to figure out what is a definition of a raga in classical terms, because that is changing every 5 years. And what used to be a raga before is not a raga now, and what is a raga now will not be a raga tomorrow. So I think even this is like the poem says, it's just a river. The music is a river that's flowing, and we need to go back and make our own meanings with it. So my music has definitely changed for each artist. The way they were doing, I definitely changed it, but I was definitely not thinking of any grammar or anything. I was just enjoying the words, and I was letting the raga come to me the way it wants to come.
I was just thinking, the invisible music of the poet's mind was expressed in front of us.
Yeah, thank you. But like,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, please. Okay, I just have one last question to everybody, really about, you obviously worked in your studios and in your, while you were driving, traveling, and thinking about this poem and whatever. That's a personal experience. I'm just always curious to ask dancers, what is it like to actually, what happens when that personal experience becomes a shared collective experience as it is? And what is that energy that the audience adds to this entire mix that makes poetry itself both a personal and a collective experience at the same time? Sorry, Shweta.
I'm happy to do this. Okay, one of the key things for me, and I think this is, as a student of dance, this is a process for me as well, is, like you said, yes, we work in our cars, in our notebooks, in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the everything. But it's about keeping yourself vulnerable enough during performance to be sensitive and not get hooked on to all your ideas, because there's something about the moment that will never happen again. And I think as a young student, your aim is always to practice and be perfect, and that's what we end up doing, and that becomes very habitual. But for me to be able to be sensitive about this poem and take in the energy of this room, I think I have to practice vulnerability every time I am in performance of any kind, whether it's in it's a small setting, whether it's a formal, informal, or a big stage, whatever it is. And I think that is the most crucial thing for me when it comes to performance.
Thank you so much. Vulnerability really takes courage. So thank you for putting yourself out there. Anuradha, your
Yeah, I think the very idea of performance is something where I am trying to create an experience and somebody out there is trying to experience what I am doing. So it's always a two-way process, and as Shweta said, the energy changes and everything. It's very different from the individual space where we are working on the idea and honing the skills. But here is where the performance happens.
Right, absolutely.
For me, I think it's dance sometimes is very impromptu. Many things you kind of created on stage. Like today, none of us rehearsed with him. We were doing, and the moment I walked in, I just saw the sofa. I said, how do I use this sofa? So I used it in the last.
That was a brilliant.
So there's nothing like being there, practicing is one thing, but what happens here at that moment is what an experience, which I think even we ourselves are not sure of what it is. So we're just sharing it with them. And if they also respond to it, then I think we are there together.
That's great. Adventure, that's the word. Yeah, adventure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think adventure comes after like rigor. So I think it's muscle memory and then you can play. Karthik, one final word from you and one Pallavi Kuti song that I think Farmaish.
Should I really sing? Because we are here for a panel. Yeah, what is the question you wanted to ask?
Just about poetry being a personal experience, but also a collective shared experience. And what is that feeling for you?
Yeah, for me, I think poetry is something that we all thrive for, because we are a society that has become prose today. And we as a society should aim towards becoming poetry, because use less words and mean more.
Absolutely,
yeah?
absolutely.
So that is something that is so beautiful. And for me, talking about the previous question you asked, I think even I write. So once I write it out, I think the poem is no longer mine. It's there on the paper, it's no longer mine. And then it has a life of its own. So I do not myself know what is my intention with it. And each person finds their own reflection and they make meaning of it in a beautiful way. So that is for me the beauty of poetry. I'll just sing one line because we are short of time. Yeah. So, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो, हाय मर जाएंगे हम तो लुट जाएंगे, ऐसी बातें किया ना करो, ऐसी बातें किया ना करो, ना करो, ना करो, आज जाने की जिद ना करो. Thank you.
Audience is thinking, aaj jaane ki zid na karo. But we have to go because Gokul's like giving me the looks. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience and for helping us realize this unique poetic experiment. Thank you to Karthik, Shweta, Anuradha and Praveen.